She vanished during a morning jog. No screams, no witnesses, only a phone left behind on a quiet road. For 22 days, America searched for Sherri Papini, a mother, a wife, a victim. Then on Thanksgiving morning, she reappeared, bruised, chained. And with a story so horrifying, the nation believed every word. She said 2 women kidnapped her. She said she survived hell. But what if the kidnapping never happened? What if the victim wasn't a victim at all? This is not a story about survival. This is a story about lies, manipulation, and one of the most shocking hoaxes in American crime history. This is the truth behind Sherri Papini. On the morning of November 2nd, 2016, a quiet suburban town in Redding, California, was shaken by a chilling mystery. Sherri Papini, a 34-year-old mother of 2, went out for a routine jog near her home and never came back. At least that's what the world was told. Sherri Papini was, by all appearances, the picture of a perfect American mom. She was married to Keith Papini, had 2 young children, and lived a seemingly normal life in a peaceful community. Friends described her as loving, energetic, and devoted to her family. Nothing about her life suggested that she would suddenly disappear. When Sherri failed to return home that afternoon, her husband became alarmed. He tried calling her phone. No answer. Hours passed. As night fell, panic set in. Keith went searching and made a terrifying discovery. Sherri's phone and earbuds were found neatly placed on the side of a rural road, as if she had vanished into thin air. Police were immediately notified. Within hours, Sherri Papini's disappearance exploded into national headlines. The image of a young, blonde mother missing without a trace captured public attention. Volunteers flooded the area to help search. Helicopters circled overhead. The FBI joined the investigation. Social media campaigns spread her photo across the country. Then came the story that turned a missing person case into a nightmare. 3 weeks later, on Thanksgiving Day 2016, Sherri Papini was found alive. She appeared on the side of a highway, over 150 miles from her home. She was bruised, emaciated, and terrified. A chain was reportedly around her waist. She told authorities a horrifying tale. She claimed that 2 Hispanic women had kidnapped her at gunpoint while she was jogging, held her captive for weeks, abused her, and finally released her. The nation was stunned and relieved. Sherri was immediately labeled a survivor. Media outlets called her story miraculous. Her husband tearfully thanked God and the community. A GoFundMe campaign raised tens of thousands of dollars to support her recovery. To the public, Sherri Papini was a victim of a brutal, racially motivated kidnapping. But something didn't sit right. Investigators quietly began to notice inconsistencies. Despite the alleged weeks of captivity, there were no signs of sexual assault. Her injuries, while real, did not match her detailed account. The descriptions of the kidnappers were vague and troubling, leading to intense scrutiny and backlash within the Hispanic community. Still, Sherri insisted her story was true. For years, the case went cold. The public moved on. Sherri returned to her family, portraying herself as a traumatized survivor trying to rebuild her life. Behind the scenes, however, investigators never stopped asking one crucial question. What really happened to Sherri Papini? Because as time would later reveal, this was not a story of survival. It was a story of deception, one that would unravel in ways no one could have imagined.
She asked me to come get her.
No.
I rented a car.
No.
I drove up and picked her up. He passed the polygraph test, Sherri.
That's not what happened. What did happen, Sherri?
After Sherri Papini's dramatic return on Thanksgiving Day 2016, the nation breathed a collective sigh of relief. A missing mother had survived unimaginable horror, or so it seemed. But as the media attention slowly faded, investigators were left with a disturbing task: verify Sherri's story. And that's where the cracks began to show. According to Sherri, she had been kidnapped at gunpoint by 2 Hispanic women, driven away in an SUV, beaten, starved, and held captive for 22 days. She claimed they covered their faces, spoke Spanish, and treated her with extreme cruelty. The story was shocking and emotional, but it was also frustratingly vague. Detectives from the Shasta County Sheriff's Office and the FBI carefully examined every detail. They analyzed her injuries, reviewed medical reports, and retraced her alleged movements. What they found raised serious questions. First, the physical evidence didn't fully match her account. Sherri did have bruises and burns, including a brand on her shoulder, but doctors noted that the injuries appeared controlled and non-lethal, not consistent with prolonged violent captivity. There were no defensive wounds, no signs of sexual assault, And despite claiming she had been chained and beaten regularly, her body told a different story. Then there was the brand. Sherri said her captors had burned a symbol into her skin. It was horrific, but investigators couldn't link the marking to any known gang, cartel, or criminal group. It didn't lead anywhere. Instead of answers, it created more confusion. Next came the phone records. Authorities discovered that before her disappearance, Sherri had been communicating with multiple men online, including former boyfriends. This information didn't immediately prove wrongdoing, but it contradicted the image of a random abduction during a casual jog. Even more troubling was the lack of witnesses. No one had seen the alleged kidnapping. No surveillance footage. No vehicle sightings. No credible tips. Despite intense national attention, not a single piece of evidence confirmed the existence of the two women, Sherri described. Meanwhile, the consequences of Sherri's accusations were spreading. Hispanic communities in California expressed fear and anger, saying the story unfairly painted them as violent criminals. Law enforcement faced criticism for pursuing what appeared to be a racially charged narrative without solid proof. Still, Sherri stood firm. She refused to cooperate fully with investigators, citing trauma. She declined follow-up interviews and avoided giving additional details. Her husband supported her publicly, insisting she was a victim who deserved peace, not suspicion. Behind closed doors, investigators felt differently. They didn't accuse her outright, but they also didn't close the case. For years, the investigation quietly remained open. Tips dried up. Leads went nowhere. Public interest vanished.
911, what is your case? I just got home from work, and my wife wasn't there, which is unusual.
To most people, Sherri Papini's story became just another unsolved mystery. But law enforcement had learned one crucial lesson. When a story feels rehearsed, incomplete, and unsupported by evidence, time often reveals the truth. And time was exactly what this case needed. Because while Sherri Papini appeared to move on with her life, the lies, if they were lies, were slowly tightening around her. And one day, a single piece of DNA would bring the entire story crashing down. For nearly 4 years, the Sherri Papini case remained quiet. No arrests, no suspects, no answers. To the public, it was an unresolved kidnapping mystery. To investigators, it was something far more unsettling, a story that refused to make sense. Then in 2020, everything changed. Law enforcement began re-examining old evidence using advanced DNA technology that wasn't available during the initial investigation. Among the items collected in 2016 was clothing Sherri had been wearing when she was released. At the time, the DNA found on it didn't match any known criminals. But technology evolves and lies don't age well. When investigators ran the DNA through updated databases, they made a shocking discovery. The DNA did not belong to a Hispanic woman. Instead, it matched a male, someone with no criminal record. That alone was explosive. Detectives traced the DNA through genetic genealogy, a method famously used in cold cases. Slowly, a family tree formed. At the center of it was a man living hundreds of miles away from Redding. His name was James Reyes. Reyes was not a stranger. As investigators dug deeper, they uncovered a secret Sherri had kept hidden from nearly everyone, including her husband. James Reyes was a former boyfriend. The two had been communicating before her disappearance, exchanging messages and making plans. According to evidence, on the day Sherri vanished, she was not abducted while jogging. She was picked up voluntarily. Phone records, travel data, and witness statements painted a completely different picture. Sherri had arranged to meet Reyes. He drove from Southern California to pick her up. Together, they traveled back to his apartment where she stayed for weeks. This wasn't a kidnapping. It was an escape. But the truth was even darker. Investigators learned that during her time with Reyes, Sherri intentionally injured herself to support the kidnapping story. Reyes later admitted that he helped her by branding her skin, causing bruises, and assisting in creating the illusion of abuse, though he claimed he believed he was helping her, not committing a crime. Sherri had planned everything. She starved herself. She asked Reyes to hurt her just enough to make the story believable. She rehearsed her lies. And when the time came, she instructed him to drop her off along a highway so she could be found. All while the nation searched for her. All while her family suffered. All while law enforcement wasted thousands of hours and resources. The image of Sherri Papini as a helpless victim shattered instantly. This was no longer a mystery. It was a calculated hoax. Investigators now faced a new question. Not what happened to Sherri Papini, But why she did it? What drove a suburban mother to fake her own kidnapping? Blame innocent people and manipulate an entire country? As the walls closed in, Sherri continued to deny everything. But the evidence was overwhelming, and in March 2022, the truth finally caught up with her. Because lies may survive headlines, but they don't survive DNA. By early 2022, investigators had assembled a case that left little room for doubt. Years of suspicion had finally transformed into undeniable proof. DNA evidence, phone records, travel data, and witness testimony all pointed to one conclusion. Sherri Papini had staged her own kidnapping. On March 3, 2022, federal agents made their move. Sherri Papini was arrested outside her home in Redding, California. Ironically, the same place where the nightmare had supposedly begun. She was taken into custody without resistance. The woman once portrayed as a symbol of survival was now facing the consequences of a carefully constructed lie. Federal prosecutors charged her with mail fraud and making false statements to federal agents. The charges were serious. Investigators revealed that after her disappearance, Sherri had collected more than $30,000 in victim compensation funds and donations. These funds were intended to support victims of violent crime, not people who fabricated it. By accepting that money, prosecutors argued, Sherri had committed fraud. As details of her arrest became public, the reaction was swift and brutal. The same media outlets that once praised her courage now condemned her deception. Headlines shifted overnight from kidnapping survivor to mastermind of a hoax, public. Sympathy evaporated, replaced by anger and disbelief. During interrogations, Sherri continued to deny responsibility. She repeated elements of her original story, even when confronted with DNA evidence linking her to James Reyes. She claimed she had been manipulated, controlled, and psychologically abused, but investigators were prepared. They played recordings. They presented timelines. They exposed contradictions. Slowly, the story collapsed. James Reyes cooperated with authorities. He admitted to harboring Sherri in his apartment for weeks and described how she asked him to help injure her to make the kidnapping story believable. He turned over items, messages, and physical evidence that directly contradicted Sherri's claims. Faced with overwhelming proof, Sherri had nowhere left to hide. In April 2022, she entered a plea deal. Sherri Papini pleaded guilty to the federal charges. In court, she admitted that she had lied to law enforcement, fabricated the kidnapping, and accepted money she did not deserve. It was a stunning reversal from years of denial. But the damage was already done. Her hoax had cost law enforcement over $150,000 in resources. It had traumatized her children, destroyed her marriage, and unfairly targeted an entire community with false accusations. Trust had been shattered both personally and publicly. As she stood before the court, no longer protected by lies or sympathy, one truth was undeniable. Sherri Papini was not a victim of a crime. She was the architect of it, and now she would face the final judgment. In September 2022, Sherri Papini stood in a federal courtroom, not as a victim, but as a convicted criminal, the woman whose disappearance once captivated. The nation now faced sentencing for a lie that had spiraled far beyond her control. The court reviewed the full scope of the damage. Prosecutors detailed how Sherri's hoax had drained public resources, misled federal investigators, and inflicted emotional harm on her family, especially her children, who grew up believing their mother had survived a terrifying kidnapping. The judge emphasized that this was not a harmless lie, but a deliberate and prolonged deception. Sherri's defense team attempted to explain her actions through mental health struggles. They argued that emotional distress and past trauma influenced her decisions. Letters from supporters were submitted, asking for leniency. Sherri herself addressed the court, offering an apology and claiming she never intended for the situation to go as far as it did. But the judge was not convinced. In November 2022, Sherri Papini was sentenced to 18 months in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. She was also ordered to pay more than $300,000 in restitution, covering costs to the FBI, local law enforcement, and the California Victim Compensation Board. The sentence sent a clear message. Faking a crime is still a crime. As Sherri was taken away, the case officially closed, but its impact did not. Her marriage ended in divorce. Keith Papini, once her strongest defender, publicly stated that he felt betrayed and manipulated. The trust that once held the family together had been permanently destroyed. Public opinion remained unforgiving. Many felt anger toward Sherri for wasting resources that could have been used to help real victims. Others expressed concern about how her false accusations had fueled racial fear and stereotypes. The case became a cautionary tale, often cited by law enforcement when discussing false reports and public trust. Sherri Papini was released from prison early in 2023 and began serving her supervised release. But freedom did not bring redemption. Her name had become synonymous with deception. Any attempt to rebuild her life would be shadowed by one inescapable truth. The internet never forgets. The Sherri Papini case left behind more than court records and headlines. It raised uncomfortable questions. Why do people fabricate victimhood? How easily can public sympathy be manipulated? And how much damage can one lie cause? In the end, this was not a story about a woman who was kidnapped. It was a story about a woman who kidnapped the truth and held an entire nation hostage with it. And that is why the Sherri Papini case will be remembered, not as a mystery, but as a warning.